Hello everyone, welcome to another NERV panel discussion. We are very excited to have everyone online here with us, and especially a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you for agreeing to be part of this discussion this evening. We are very excited to have all of you and all of your opinions and thoughts that you have to share with us. So just as a brief introduction, we are NERV. We are the Neural Engineering Research Venture, and Siobhan and I will be your hosts for the evening. Siobhan will be on screen leading the discussion, and I will be working behind the scenes. And then, as usual, you can look out for Darby in the comment section. He will be there. So as a brief introduction, I will start, and I will hand over to Siobhan and then our panelists to all give a brief introduction of themselves. So my name is Julianne, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Stellenbosch. My research focuses on binocular rivalry and its effects on human consciousness. And I'm also particularly interested in consciousness and decision-making studies. So Siobhan, over to you.
Hi everyone, it's awesome to have you online with us. I'm currently working at a startup, which is a slight detour from neuroscience where I normally find myself, and I'm primarily interested in decision-making and all the neural processes leading up to it. And now I'm going to hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Thanks for having me, everyone, on this panel discussion. My name is Archie, and currently I'm a PhD student studying at MIT. My research focuses on federated learning within multi-agent reinforcement learning systems within the healthcare sector. Long title, but that's a short version of what I'm doing. And I'm currently a practice lead at one of the companies in South Africa. And I'm from Joburg. That's me.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. It's great to be here. I'm now doing a postdoc at the Institute of Science and Technology of Austria. My research is involving the data analysis and computational modeling of human neural networks derived from induced pluripotent stem cells. I also organize a summer school in Cape Town and the Deep Learning Indaba X, wherever it decides to be in South Africa.
Kira, you're muted.
Hi everyone, I'm Kira. I'm joining you from the Karoo, so hopefully I won't have connection or muting issues. That's not really something the Karoo promotes, that's just me. I'm currently a junior doctor running a very rural hospital here, 2 ComServes, but I have a background in neuroscience and maths. And in particular, I'm starting my PhD at UCL, Gatsby unit at the end of this year. And I'm interested in high dimensional representations, neural representations, sensory processing, and how we can use these to help understand learning difficulties.
Hi everyone, my name is Sitalwan Azwane. I'm also a PhD student. I'm at UCL in London, and my research focuses on robotics and AI, particularly trying to do safe robot learning or kind of learn general robot behaviors under safety constraints.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. And just to all of our attendees, we would love to get to know you as well. So please be sure to answer the questions posted in our poll so we can sort of get a feeling for where everyone is at and what your thoughts and feelings are about all of this as well. So I'll now hand over to Siobhan, who will be leading our discussion for the panel event.
Thanks, Julianne. Great. So this evening we'll be dividing the questions into 3 sections. We'll start off with just what it is like to be studying in your relative fields and your perspectives from that point of view. Next, we'll be moving on to current research, what's happening at the moment, and then finally we'll delve into some speculation and see where that takes us. We have prepared some questions, but if you're in the audience and you have some questions, or even if you're in the panel and you'd like to pose questions, please add them using the Ask Question feature, and then be sure to vote on your favorite ones as well, so we can be sure to get them asked. And so with that, I am going to dive immediately into the first question, which I'm going to start. Chris, if you'll kick us off. What made you choose a career in your respective field, and specifically a research career?
Always a good question. So the essence is I chose what I do based on the people more than anything, and then a lot of science interests me. So I'm just getting some feedback from someone, not sure who. Anyway, but yeah, essentially the people, the projects I think are awesome, and then I have an inherent desire for the pursuit of scientific knowledge. I like to think of myself as a professional problem solver, so that has always motivated me. And I've been lucky to find supervisors who can mentor me and support like innovative projects, push our knowledge of basic science, and yet also have some sort of clinical impact. And I think that a lot of what I do is scientifically interesting, but also will have an impact at some point. And so that has guided my career.
Yeah, maybe I can also pitch in here. Perhaps I have a slightly different perspective of how I ended up where I did. I actually ended up, I guess ending up soon doing a PhD in comp neuro, basically because I really like maths. But for various reasons, which are sort of like high school and life, I ended up studying medicine. And I really love medicine at this stage, and I'd like to integrate the science that I do with medicine. And I think that the role of particularly people like clinicians, scientists to do this is really powerful. And that's something I'm really looking forward to doing one day. It's probably going to take many, many years. But essentially, I started studying medicine, liked it, but also did a bunch of maths on the side. And I really enjoyed problem solving from doing Olympiad maths in high school. And then I figured out that the brain is something that we don't understand very well, has got enough medicine to be relevant, but also has a bunch of very cool maths that can be applied to it to understand it. And I got an opportunity to leave medicine for a little bit to kind of dabble in neuroscience, and then decided to continue that. So I did my master's while I was finishing my med degree, then kind of ended up finishing my qualifications in South Africa. And yeah, so now I'm kind of on the track of still trying to combine all these things that I love, but hopefully getting a little bit closer. Yeah, so that's kind of how I ended. It's mostly selfish, I suppose. It's mostly things that I find interesting. But I also think that a lot of this type of work can be really relevant for patients, and I really enjoy seeing patients. So that's something that definitely motivates me to keep going on this strange path. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm liking that we have I think we have quite a strong medical link this evening. Archie, would you like to go next?
Sure. So unlike everyone else so far, I actually don't have much of a medical link, but what I am trying to do is actually get more and more involved into the medical sector, because I personally feel that we need to start collaborating from a tech perspective and from a medical perspective, and the combination of the two is actually where I'm interested in. So just to give a bit of background as to how I'm studying what I'm studying is, I found it. So I'm actually from the machine learning side and the data engineering side of things. So within the production section, so in the financial space, in the mining sector, that's where I come from. And obviously in the research element as well. But what I started seeing very, very clearly was within the healthcare space, there's a huge divide. There's a huge divide between what's happening in the research sector, which is there's some phenomenal work happening there, but that often isn't translated into the healthcare industry, which means there's a knock-on effect to patient care, which is something that I'm actually quite passionate about. So that's essentially where I wanted to actually bring my research into it. So as I was trying to find a topic for my PhD, I actually started seeing that as much as we have machine learning on its side and reinforcement learning and all these different AI techniques, and we have the healthcare space, the biggest barrier that I've seen personally is privacy. So patient privacy, data security, all of that is the biggest stumbling block that I've come across personally. And that's essentially how I started diving into federated learning. So by still ensuring that patients have their records safely in a safe, secure manner, as well as ensuring there's privacy at the same time. But us from practitioner perspective, we can still build very cool machine learning models to predict whether someone could potentially have a disease, or there's so many things we can do once we sort out the very basic component of security and privacy. which I'm calling basic, but it's not really so basic. A lot of people struggle with that. So yeah, that's essentially how I started getting into the federated learning element of things. And then taking it a bit further, I wanted to actually dive into reinforcement learning. And that's how I'm actually basically using federated learning techniques to actually optimize transfer learning in multi-agent reinforcement learning methods. So that's how my entire project translated. It just came up it was a natural progression of where I see the biggest problems in the healthcare industry. And that's actually how I started where I am.
Fantastic. Do you maybe want to take this opportunity to tell us a bit about your community that you're building?
Yes. So actually, Chris is also on the community. But essentially what we've wanted to do, and Siobhan was also right there in the beginning trying to help us to get us to build this community. So what we're trying to do is actually bring in people from the tech space, so machine learning practitioners, anyone in the AI industry, as well as healthcare practitioners together. So we can actually work collaboratively to build a community that understands both sides of the agenda, because by having two separate siloed environments, we're not going to be able to solve the problems we need to solve in the overall healthcare environment. So what we're doing is we've actually created a community called SisonkeBiotik, and we'll probably provide more information at a later stage. Siobhan will let me know about it. But essentially what we want to do is have this community to come together and start solving real problems within the healthcare sector. And we need help of healthcare practitioners, we need the help of actual ML practitioners to come together to the forum and start speaking each other's languages, because we keep missing each other for some odd reason. So yeah, that's the community we're putting together.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll post links to your various channels. Khanda, please tell us about your journey.
Yeah, so in my case, I think my journey started maybe purely out of interest. So as an undergraduate student at Wits in South Africa, I found programming like a very interesting subject. Right, and then somehow discovered the robotics club, and we were given these kind of quadcopters to kind of fly around. At that point, I actually discovered how difficult it is to just get to get a kind of robot to do something that you wanted to do. So, and then at a later stage, I think at honors level, I then kind of discovered machine learning and reinforcement learning and all these tools that can be used to kind of specify or like kind of instruct robots and try to get them to do more interesting things or kind of perform tasks in a general way. And yeah, like I just kept falling, I think, further and further into the rabbit hole. I did a master's in reinforcement learning, trying to kind of do research into how transfer learning can be used to speed up the learning of robot behaviors. And I guess the majority of my master's was actually like done in simulated environments, right? So you would understand that not a lot of people have robot equipment, and also it's very expensive and stuff. And then also, you don't want to kind of run something that you're not sure about, like on the physical equipment, right? Because if you break it, then that's it. So yeah, most of the time I was kind of doing experiments in like I think simulated environment. But now that like I'm a PhD student, I do have an appetite for actually doing some stuff on the physical hardware, like to actually get some actual robots doing something useful. And the topic came out of wanting to do that, right? So I'm kind of trying to focus on the safety aspects associated with applying these learning-based methods on robot platforms. So, like there's the safety that like you get, the first aspect of safety is like when you're still training, I think your models and trying to get like, if you need data from the robot, it needs to kind of learn in such a way that it doesn't actually disrupt, it doesn't disrupt itself or its surroundings. Then the other one is like safety at deployment time, which is making sure that like if it does observe like things it didn't see during training, it's going to act in such a way that it doesn't kind of cause harm to itself or like its surroundings. So yeah, I'm just like following this rabbit hole to see where it leads, and hopefully one day we'll have robots that are kind of relevant for a lot of kind of useful things, like a lot of industries, and maybe there'll be like actual kind of impact, like social impact as well from this research. Yeah.
Awesome. Everyone's doing very exciting things. The research envy is like creeping in slowly but surely. We have a question from the audience, which is coming from Anna. What skill do you wish you would have had prior to starting your PhD, particularly considering that you're working in these very diverse fields? Kira, will you kick us off? You're muted.
I haven't started my PhD yet, so I guess that's a loaded question. But I think in terms of at least applying for PhDs, things that I think were really useful and perhaps underrated were just general communication skills, being able to present your work well, so presenting my master's work, being able to create good figures. These sort of like very soft skills, but I think are sometimes maybe kind of not looked at. And then I guess I'd just say like overall just maths, good linear algebra, probability theory, like having those kind of sort of topics as basics almost seems to be really useful because I mean I did a lot of interviews where I got asked lots of these things and I had to sort of figure out things, and having that kind of baseline, even if I've been a doctor for a couple of years, is really helpful. So, I mean, all of that is also to say, I think you can kind of approach these fields, at least at my level, it seems like you can approach these fields from pretty much anywhere. Like wherever you come from, if you're willing to put in a bit of effort, learn a bit, if you're interested, you'll pick up what you need to know, and then you can take that forward, which I think is really exciting. The kind of multidisciplinary sort of approach and setup is kind of exciting. Very limitless, which is cool. Yeah.
I would like to follow on there and say it's a bit scary that Kira thinks she needs more maths when she has a degree in maths, and I do not. And so it always depends on what questions you're going to be asking and how you're going to be tackling it. But having some more maths and physics background is always useful. But I would honestly say that how you want to approach something, figure out what skills you need, and that is difficult in its own right. I mean, I definitely got that from someone else, basically showing me their awesome work and me wanting to try go towards that direction and realizing that it's out of my depth and what are the gaps that I need to fill in order to achieve that. So in this circumstance, what I was interested in was maths and physics based questions to neuroscience, and so that's where I started to lean towards. But having a good foundation in software engineering is also useful for building code that other people can use, / yourself from 6 months ago knows what's going on. But yeah, it just depends on the question and how you want to approach it.
Yeah, if I can jump in. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Go for it.
Yeah, I really want to agree with Chris as well. I think the strongest skill there for me was the software engineering aspect. Like, I think if you're the kind of student maybe that has been like academic like for most of your career, right? I would kind of suggest that you also invest in like these software engineering skills because it's kind of how research I think works is like a lot of the time you'll be reading papers and stuff, but then also you'll have to make sense of other people's code, and being able to kind of convert that into something that you can use and understand and then kind of upgrade or like iterate on is something that cannot be underestimated. Like, so the amount of time that you save if you know your way around like kind of any particular language, like for example if you know your way around Python or whatever. So I would say people should definitely invest in their programming skills and software engineering skills, and also understand that the learning doesn't stop, right? So like there's like a lot of different versions of stuff being released like every now and then, and yeah, just maybe try and stay up to date as well. I would say maybe the other skill that I resonated with here was the maths, I think. So machine learning, as much as it's been kind of abstracted away by like these many libraries that allow you to like do very impressive things with like 5 lines of code. At the very basic, the most basic level there, you find like, all the underlying mathematics and stuff, so to be able to do research, I think you generally need to be able to take these things apart, right, and understand exactly like what's happening, and also being brave enough to kind of like say, okay, maybe the PyTorch implementation of this loss function is not okay. I'm gonna come up with my own, so being able to kind of make those type of changes, I think, is going to help you go a long way in your research journey, right? Having that understanding like of how a lot of things work mathematically, and that's also going to help you a lot when you read papers as well, and understanding exactly what the contribution of the paper is. If this is something that's important for you, this is relevant for you or not, because sometimes it may seem like something is like very relevant, whereas it actually isn't. Yeah.
Cool. Before I just want to ask on the software engineering / programming skills. Do you have, Chris and Khan, do you have any suggestions of ways to improve this? Because in any way.
I would say, so maybe I'll say what kind of works for me, or what I aspire to kind of do, because I don't have this down just yet. So like there are like kind of things like Kaggle, so you can kind of maybe do a couple of competitions and things that keep your kind of skills sharp, right? Software engineering skills and data processing skills, just do like these standard competitions like every now and then. I guess there's also things like HackerRank if you're the type of person who's really not sure what they're doing in any particular like programming language, and you want to kind of strengthen your skills. And the underlying point that I'm trying to make here is that you should try and practice as well. Outside the projects you actually work on, try and challenge yourself and force yourself to kind of use the other parts of like, I don't know, the certain aspects of the language you wouldn't necessarily be using on a day-to-day basis, like understand what collections and iterators are, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, Kwanda gave a great answer, and I'll just add a little bit on to say, do an introductory course and then work on a project, because you will often know what you don't know once you need to do something. So yeah, do a project and then do a project with someone else, because then you'll learn all the tools you need to collaborate with other people, and it improves how you write code if you know someone else is going to be looking at it.
Fantastic answers. Archie, what did your take? There's 2 questions that have been posed, so please feel free to address both.
Cool. So I resonate with everything that has been said. I think having your math skills, your physics skills, all of that is very, very beneficial. It's important to have your foundations in place, having your software engineering skills in place. Something that has worked for me personally is actually having industry experience. So it's just pretty much exactly like what's being said. Once you kind of have an understanding of what the real world is looking for, you tend to be able to start looking out for specifics. Like, for example, in software engineering techniques, you start figuring out how to modularize your code. You understand from a data preprocessing perspective what you need to start looking out for to ensure that when you are actually building a model, what you should, you shouldn't be doing this at all, or whatever the case may be. Like, there's different things you only gain by experience. So I think industry level experience is, I think, very beneficial. So internships, and like it's been said, doing side projects, working with people on something that's completely different to what you're doing, it might seem pointless at that moment, but once you actually start gaining the skills from there, you actually realize how valuable it is. Then the other thing that has been very, very valuable for me is actually collaboration. So I think that is something that's extremely underrated, especially in research, is everyone tends to go down their own little avenues and don't necessarily look at different disciplines. So something that's been very beneficial for me, and I'm grateful for the industry experience that I've had for this, is because I've always had to constantly work with different disciplines. So I think that's something that needs to be translated within the research aspect of things as well, because when you start collaborating with people from different avenues, that's when you might just get a spark that you never had before. So I think that's also something that's very, very important, to ensure that you constantly collaborating with people. If you have a community, even better, because then you know people that are actually in the same space. They may have tackled something similar before. So that's also something that I think is very powerful. In terms of how you can potentially shape up your software engineering skills, projects definitely do languages that you haven't done before, but also if you do get the opportunity to actually do internships, take that opportunity, because that is very, very valuable. That's me.
Diverse experience.
Before the next question, this has all been excellent advice as usual from these people. I would also say that whatever you decide to do, you're probably going to be lacking in something. So that's normal. There will almost always be something you wish that you had learned in addition, but time is finite, unfortunately. But on that side, there's also going to be questions and approaches that are going to be complementary to the skills you do have. And so you can follow your strengths while like upskilling yourself on the side on your weaknesses, / collaborating with other people to leverage their skills. And then ultimately learning how to learn is probably one of the most useful skills. And it's not, there are explicit courses and it's not often taught, but being able to quickly adapt or quickly grasp something is a tremendous benefit.
Fantastic. These are some amazing answers. Our next question is about some of the challenges that we might experience that maybe come up specifically in academia when pursuing these fields of neuroscience and or artificial intelligence. Archie, will you take the lead on this one? Oh, did you not catch the question? Oh, just before you start speaking, you are muted.
Yes.
But
is it fine?
Yeah, but now the sound's on. So the question is, what are some of the challenges of pursuing artificial intelligence and or neuroscience, specifically in academia?
So, I mean, for me personally, it has been lack of resources, specifically because of the field that I'm pursuing. It is relatively new, and finding people who have a similar sort of wavelength as you know, the secure and private AI space of things has been a challenge. And that has been something that I am struggling with quite often. But over and above that is, as much as there isn't enough resources, there's also too many resources and you're not necessarily sure which one actually relates to your field. So having said that, one thing that has actually helped me in being able to understand whether something is useful or not is actually to just do a little bit of extra research and try and see who's actually using this paper or whatever the case may be, and then actually try and break it down from there, because it is kind of impossible to read everything that's out there, and most of the time you might find that it isn't actually relevant to you. So that's been one of the challenges that I've come across. The second challenge is definitely when you're working within the space, you often take, I don't know if everyone else feels this way, but I often feel like I'm behind. I'm always behind, and there's something that I should be doing more, that I should be actually being a lot further ahead than I should be. And that is completely, well, for me, I keep telling myself that's completely normal. There's no race. You're only racing with yourself. Just ensure that you keep to your goals. So it's that sort of competition that tends to also be a challenge within the academic space, because there's also other people out there that are pursuing similar sort of challenges, and you want to also kind of inherently at a race when you're doing this. So I try not to think of it as a race, and rather just pursue my specific project and try and ensure that whatever I'm doing, there is some benefit to in the long run, as opposed to trying to get a paper published from the get-go. So yeah.
Thanks. Kira, what's your take?
I'm not sure. I think challenges there's obviously lots of like personal challenges, and then there's more general ones. I agree with kind of the idea of there being a lot of sort of almost information overload, and having to kind of choose what direction to go in that space is both exciting but can also be challenging. And I think what's interesting about these types of fields, of course, is that you might think that, like, say, an academic environment might be more restrictive. It might mean that there's slightly less freedom. I mean, I haven't really worked in industry in terms of the ML space, but I think the academia kind of goal of publishing papers and kind of going through that rat race might mean that you end up doing research you're not, that maybe isn't completely your interest, but is the interest of the environment. That's something that's probably at risk in industry as well. I think there's also, this is probably true of quite a lot of people in the space, because of a lot of these people have very employable skills. I think there's obvious like personal costs to taking on academia and academic careers in these spaces. I mean, so obviously as a doctor, there's earning potential. I think a lot of people that are good at software dev have great earning potential that might be outside academia. And that's along with the usual sort of academic requirements of perhaps having to move somewhere, of giving up certain other parts of life. I think that's also like a practical thing that is quite relevant, especially as a lot of sort of people in academia in these fields end up going into industry or into other ventures after their academic degrees or journey, often perhaps more for like practical reasons than necessarily for not wanting to do that kind of research. So those are things that I think are quite relevant and should be, I guess, spoken about. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think there's there seems to be a lot of support that's growing for these things in Africa, which is something that I'm quite excited about. And that's very encouraging for overcoming these sort of challenges in terms of doing these sort of careers from an African point of view. But that's perhaps not the immediate question, so I'll just leave that there.
I think that's really relevant. I think the African context is quite unique and one to be discussed. If you'd like to elaborate, but I see Chris is nodding, so I think you might want to go next.
Well, let me answer. So as Kira knows, because we were in the same group, doing computational neuroscience in Africa/South Africa is pretty challenging because there's not much opportunity to collaborate with local people or have seminars. And so it's like Worldwide Neuro is a great way to make it more accessible by having it online. But previously seminars, academic seminars often used to be in person, like almost exclusively. And so trying to do a computational neuroscience seminar or meeting of computational neuroscience speakers was highly restrictive from an African context. There's obviously been ways to try and mitigate that, but it will always be there. In general, I mean, the term challenges for pursuing neuroscience, AI, is always quite broad, because it's a challenge versus industry. It's like, well, you might not have as much money, you might not move as fast as industry, and there may be less jobs available. However, you do get academic freedom that you could have. There's a whole bunch of other things that may weigh more importantly than you for you. And what Kira said as well, in terms of having to move places. So I just moved to Austria after doing a PhD in Cape Town, and my wife is joining me. But if she didn't have the flexibility, then that would be highly restrictive, and I wouldn't be able to have the position I am in. So it's often situations, and there's a whole bunch of personal challenges that come along with that. But I'm just in a lucky scenario.
Thanks. Conde, will you round this question out?
Yeah. So I think maybe because a lot of us are in the same situation, I think the same things keep popping up, right? So I also resonate highly with the whole difficulty that's associated with navigating literature nowadays. So trying to go through some papers and find what's relevant, I think the rate at which papers are being published nowadays, is kind of like making that problem even harder, I think, every year, right? Just basically maybe perhaps going on archive or going on wherever you find papers and trying to find what the main ideas of a paper are, is I think getting more and more difficult and challenging each day. And I think this is probably more difficult for people who are just starting out, or people who are still at the stage where they are looking at what kind of research they want to do. And then, there's a standard imposter syndrome, where you're like, my idea is good enough, can I share it with these people? Maybe I should sit and be quiet and let the smart person speak, So there's also that sort of thing, and then also the other one is like the fact that depending on what you're doing, the skills that you're kind of investing in, the time, all of that may not necessarily translate to some kind of job in industry at a later point in time. All right. Yeah. So those are essentially like some kind of I guess challenges, and I think with that last one, it kind of depends on what the individual wants, So there is also some kind of, perhaps let's say you walk around and say, yeah, I want to kind of solve a real problem. I want to kind of solve this particular thing, and like Kira was saying, you might be in a position where you're forced to kind of do research because that's what the environment is actually doing, and that's you can't just basically work on a project or maybe do a PhD without being expected to publish something. Yeah.
Awesome. So with this discussion, we touched on our last two questions for this section. So the first one, the second last question for this round is, what are your thoughts about the premise of publish or perish versus slow science? Kwando, will you take lead on this one?
Okay, so maybe following on what I was saying earlier around the challenge that the challenge associated with kind of trying to build like a literature review as a PhD student, like in any given topic, there is definitely, I would say, perhaps too many papers nowadays, and I think maybe if people took more time and spent some time kind of developing those ideas and actually trying to solve the problem, that basically they are working on, then we might actually maybe progress faster as a scientific community, right? And I don't know if other people think the same, but I think maybe it might be easier to do research without the pressure to kind of like publish. Hey, there's a conference. Now you have to kind of prioritize what you need to learn. You need to prioritize the kind of algorithms you're going to use. If something seems too complicated, you might prioritize something that's kind of easier so that you can make that particular deadline. I think the whole philosophy around this kind of slow science thing is about kind of perhaps taking your time and kind of making sure that you may produce one paper, but it will be maybe a good paper or something at some point. Or like you actually solve the underlying problem and not leave it for future work every time.
Do any of the panelists have a contrasting opinion, or anything burning that I'd like to add?
I'll fight Kwanda a bit. Yeah. So I generally agree with what you're saying. So it's not contrasting per se. But I mean, publishing is useful as a form of metric for how scientists are doing. The issue really is like having to publish a lot and quickly and using that as the sole metric as a scientist. So I think there should be other forms of scientific attribution that we can do that also includes remuneration instead of just going for big grants, and doesn't necessarily require the traditional hierarchical progression that happens in academia. I think that would help tremendously. And I think that's one of my points.
Fantastic. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is about imposter syndrome. And I would like we can go on a bit around Robin on this one. And if any of you have discovered the secret to overcoming or at least managing imposter syndrome. Kira, is your connection all right?
I'm not sure. My connection's been quite sure if you guys can hear me.
Oh, Kira's just dropped off. Would anybody like to take over while she reconnects?
I can go so long while she tries to reconnect. So I still have imposter syndrome. I haven't figured it out yet. It's something I think the more you spend in academia or in the industry, you tend to realize how much you don't know as well. So it's just something I think it'll always be, well, for me personally, it'll always be a challenge just to always constantly feel like your ideas are not worth it. But something I have realized is the more you do actually put yourself out there and actually take the risk, the more you realize how valuable your idea is, because it might not necessarily seem like the best idea in your head, but to someone else, it might actually be valuable. So I think something that has helped me a lot is actually taking the risk, which I was very afraid to do, but I have got a little bit better at it these days, just taking more of a risk and just getting my idea out there as opposed to keeping them in and assuming that it's not worth it. The worst that could happen is it gets rejected. So I have less of a fear of that now. So yeah, that's essentially what's helped me so far. Still have it though.
Kira, would you like to? Go for it, Kondev. Go for it.
Okay, I was just about to say I'm gonna jump in as well and say, okay, maybe I'm also have imposter syndrome. I think in this type of environment, it's quite common. And then what has helped me so far is, I would say, the environment. So I would say, like if you're one of those PhD students or like graduate students who've been able to find a good supervisor, then they might create like an environment where you don't feel like, your ideas, like don't mean anything or so something like this. Like, if you have someone who's kind of supportive and you have kind of like students, they create like an environment where you feel that, okay, cool, like I can contribute and I'm actually here to learn. And people being approachable also goes a long way, because like, you don't feel like, okay, I need to get my stuff together before I actually approach the person, So yeah, like I think sometimes it has a lot to do with your environment as well. Like other than what you think as a person.
Yeah, if I can maybe jump in, because I think sometimes you can't find the right environment, which is fine. I've generally gone for sort of considering what's worse. Like, is it worse to be an imposter or feel like you're an imposter in an environment where you don't belong, but then you are kind of motivated to work and prove yourself, or to not go for that opportunity at all? And I think the latter is way worse. Yeah, the worst that happens, as has been said, is that you get rejected. And so, yeah, I mean, I think imposter syndrome is also not always the worst thing. Sometimes it works to your advantage. Sometimes it means you actually are kind of, you work a bit harder. The main thing I think definitely to overcome is to reach out and to speak to people and to be prepared for the rejection, but also to just go for it. And so far, I think that works out. Like if you have something and a lot of people, one or two of them reject you, but a lot of people are like, oh, that's kind of cool, then eventually you get to the next level, and then you have a different type of imposter syndrome, but you overcame the previous level of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I think definitely overall, just, I mean, actually considering what you have to lose is much less just going for it and being confident. And the other thing, which was some advice given to me ages ago, was to sometimes just acknowledge it. So like if you're in a situation where you're with people where you feel out of your depth, or presenting and you feel out of your depth, to actually just say to everyone, this is funny, like I feel out of my depth, how strange. And then everyone can kind of get over it, and you can all continue and actually talk about the science and what's interesting. The last thing that I would say is that, I mean, sure, like an idea might be your idea, but it's still actually just a thought and a concept. And if you're not willing to have that concept like properly taken apart, especially in the early stages, it might just give you more trouble later on. And again, it's not yours. It's somewhere in the ether of overall cognition and intelligence or thought. So I mean, you don't have to take it particularly personally if that gets a little bit of crunching. Yeah, anyway, so those are sort of like, I guess, cognitive strategies to try and overcome it, which have worked so far for me, I think. Says unsurely.
I agree with all the panelists, and I will particularly agree with Kira in saying my strategy is acceptance and apathy, which is pretty much a summarization. So Accept what you do know and what you don't know. And then like, how much did you care about that? So I've met enough people who are better than me at all sorts of things, probably many things. Everyone in this panel is better than me at least one thing, probably many, many things. But they all have unique combinations. Perspectives are always different. And the key, I think, is in managing expectations. So what do I expect of myself in the position that I'm in and what I'm applying for example? And what are the expectations that others have of me? And how much of those expectations are influenced by those around me, so the environment. And so what I try to do is celebrate other people's achievements as much as possible and celebrate my own, because often it's collaborations that get the work done. So I rely on others in order to be able to support my weaknesses. So yeah, I'll never be 100% comfortable with my position, who I am, what's going on. But managing expectations, and especially those I have of myself, can push me towards being a better version of me and competing with my past self and who I was. And however you measure that is probably a good way to manage it, rather than trying to compete with everyone in the world. So it doesn't seem mentally healthy.
Awesome.
Yeah, if I can just jump in after Chris, right? Yeah, this is a point that's definitely, I think, has been mentioned, but I would like to emphasize it. I think the other important thing is also to be honest, right? I think it fits into managing expectations somehow, but I think sometimes maybe you'll find yourself in a situation where you're presenting something, like it may or may not be your idea or something, but I don't think people are actually expecting you to have, everything, like down to the last detail. Like, I don't actually expect, and I don't think people have that kind of expectation on you, So when maybe you're trying to explain something like, I don't know, maybe kind of neural networks or something, and then you forget how this part is supposed to go, I think just admitting and saying, oh, okay, I actually forgot how this goes, or I'm not sure how this works, but the main idea that I'm trying to convey by this is blah blah blah, and then I think once you become someone who is kind of honest about their own knowledge, the limits of their knowledge and things like this, then I think you can minimize imposter syndrome. I'm not sure if you can get rid of it completely, but yeah, you can definitely, it does go a long way to kind of admit what you know and be honest about it. Because problems start when you say you know something and then you don't. Yeah.
Speaking exactly to Kwanda's point, is some of my favorite conversations have been where either I admitted or the other person admitted that they didn't know something. And then we were like, cool, let's figure it out together. Let's talk about this issue that neither of us know ourselves and try to find a new way of looking at it. And those have always been enjoyable.
Awesome. That was an awesome first round. And the next round, we're going to get more into the current research on what's happening. So my first question, which I'm going to pose to Chris first, is what research results are you most excited about at the moment? And I've left this purposefully open-ended and general, so please feel free to go down any rabbit hole you choose.
Well, I'm going to start and be biased and say studying human neurons, because there's a whole bunch of technology coming out recently in order to be able to study them more in depth. And so traditionally trying to get people to give some human tissue to study is a little tough. So they'd have to go for elective surgery for something major in order for that to be the case for a neuroscientist to be able to look at the neurons. But I'm working in a scenario where we can look at human neurons from stem cells, and I mean like induced pluripotent stem cells, so that's non-invasive, taking some of your skin cells or swab of your cheek and being able to convert those to neurons in the dish. And so those neurons would have the exact same DNA as neurons in your brain, but are on a dish growing in a relatively controlled environment. And what I'm analyzing is they're grown on these high density multi-electrode arrays. So there's like tens of thousands of neurons with tens and thousands of electrodes being able to record from them. And so it's just a really, really cool scale. of doing this, and it means we can understand control human neurons and not only those who from people who've required surgery. So the project that I'm involved in, for example, is focused on people who have epilepsy and autism spectrum disorder. But crucially, what we can do is we can take control humans and get human neurons derived from them and have a closer comparison. That's the goal, at least. So that'd be great. And I just want to, I'm biased. So that's what I'm very fascinated by, what I think is really cool, what excites me, gets me up in the morning. And then some other very different work of mine is working on the credit assignment problem in the brain. So that's work by like Blake Richards, Richard Lord, many others. That fascinates me, how this is a bad terminology, but how the brain does backprop the credit assignment problem. Yeah.
So I'm guessing that you are in the camp that neuroscience can contribute greatly towards AI.
We're skipping ahead.
I know. I'm worried we don't get to the question, so I'm sneaking it in.
I think very few people would disagrey. A lot of people, I think, Kira, we can fight. I think a lot of people would say neuroscience can still offer a lot to AI. And particularly why I think this is that, I mean, the head of DeepMind, for example, thinks so. Many others do as well. So it's not just me being super biased here. But yeah, I think from attention, from, I don't know, I mean, a whole bunch of history of AI comes from cognitive sciences. Who invented backprop was not just Jeffrey Hinton, but it was also by some cognitive sciences. Who invented the perceptron, that was from cognitive sciences as well. Reinforcement learning, psychology. There's a whole bunch of history there, and AI and neuroscience may weave in and out over the decades, but I think there will always be things that they can learn from each other and contribute towards.
Kira, please feel free to counter, and then you can tell us about your most exciting research avenues or ones that you're most interested in.
I mean, I don't mean to counter directly. I'm more skeptical, perhaps. I used to be quite strongly a proponent of this, and I probably fall more on the neuroscience side than the AI side. Now I'm becoming a little bit more skeptical of how far the two are kind of separating from each other, and some of the attempts to figure out how things we found work for machine learning work in the brain, I think maybe effort that might be misdirected. Perhaps it just doesn't do that in the brain. Which is not to say that there isn't anything to learn. I think you're entirely right. Historically, there's been a lot to learn from neurons. But I find the brain very interesting because I think it's just got, it's got a lot of layers, to say it like that. I mean, there's cells that are ridiculously complicated that create networks and feedback systems that are very complicated. I mean, perhaps we'll understand that at some point, but yeah, I guess I think that we are going to get less and less from neuroscience that will be useful for machine learning, but that's more of a feel, and I'm okay with being excited to try it out. I'm just a little bit skeptical. Yeah, which is not to say, I mean, it's clear that both fields benefit from each other, and one of the things that I think I particularly like is being able to use tools from machine learning and otherwise to inform neuroscience research. And in particular, I suppose this echoes a lot of what Chris has said, but I think there's just a lot more data now on what neurons are doing. And it's possible that we'll figure out more about how the brain works at the scale of cognition and computation, which is kind of where both fields care. When we're able to analyze all of that data in a good way. And besides what's already been sort of mentioned, we've got sort of neuropixels, multicellular recordings, we've got calcium imaging techniques, we've also got genetic techniques like RNA-seq, being able to see the quantity and distribution of genetic material. We know that cells in the brain are incredibly diverse. I think the thing perhaps that I'm probably not going to research, but that I do think is really cool. And if I was perhaps in a different field, I consider this is just overall genetic tools and how they can be used both for the brain and just in general for biology. I think being able to use things like CRISPR to actually change particular genes and sort of manufacture them, being able to create these specimens like Drosophila and other specimens where we can really tweak the genetics. Mice, of course, have been done for a long time in terms of optogenetics. I think all of that at huge scale could be massively cool and really useful for neuroscience with the tools to analyze that data. The last thing that I kind of like, but this is really a pipe dream perhaps, is when kind of cool pure maths sort of comes out of neuroscience. So you'll find like occasionally these strange sort of, and perhaps they're just like pipe dream kind of, or just people finding cool maths where there isn't actually cool maths, because maths can do that. But sometimes you'll just find really cool topology proofs or things from strange parts of maths, group theory, whatever, applied to neuroscience, and I suppose to ML. And that I also find quite cool in terms of just science in general, always having this fantastic relationship with the mathematicians. That's probably just because I'm a huge fan of that. Yeah, that was a bit of a long ramble, but basically, yeah, I remain skeptical overall.
Awesome. Back to the original question, Kondo, what are you most excited about at the moment?
Yeah, maybe I'm more excited about like it's more the problem, I think, more than the results that I'm seeing, but seeing that like there are some contexts in which people win when they use analytical techniques, particularly like in robotics, and then there's some scenarios where people also win when they use like data-driven methods. So I'm particularly, I think, excited by kind of papers that combine these data-driven techniques and analytical techniques like in a very principled way. Some recent work, I guess, in that direction would be the stuff on neural ordinary differential equations, right? So like those papers that kind of could solve some differential equations by using neural networks, right? So yeah, like those sort of things I think I find very fascinating, and because I do feel that like I guess neural networks in general are like very powerful function approximators, but we need principled ways of kind of injecting prior knowledge into them, because at the end of the day, the domain expert really does know his stuff, and they are called domain experts for a reason. And I think humans don't learn from scratch, which I guess neural networks tend to do. So yeah, like I'm interested in kind of like that general line of thought of like trying to inject some kind of I guess prior knowledge into neural networks, or like kind of highly flexible, not just neural networks, but like I guess highly flexible learning models. Let me see. I think also like work that's also in the transfer learning space, where like now that you've kind of injected this prior knowledge maybe into a particular model or something, or you've learned useful behaviors or a bunch of useful behaviors, how do you now kind of transfer these like to a new agent? Like how can a new agent use these to kind of learn whatever task that it's focused on? So for robotics, I think we would really love to have something like an ImageNet, right? So you see how ImageNet is like people have trained and gotten these very beautiful features from like a very, very like I would say diverse data set. But it would be cool if we could do something similar for robot behaviors, right? Where you just have like your robot or maybe your Roomba, you wanted to learn how to navigate better in your room, and then you just you have a pre-training thing. It can be a network, it can be some other weird object, and you use that to kind of make sure that this learns like has a better initialization as far as learning is concerned. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's what I'm excited about. Yeah, or looking into. Yeah.
All very exciting. Archie, would you like to round us out?
Sure. So there's obviously a lot of things in the industry at the moment, and I will also be biased because of what I'm actually doing most of my research in at the moment, which has to do with secure and private AI, as well as transfer learning within the reinforcement learning space. So something that I'm quite excited about is privacy of data is starting to become more and more prevalent, right? I don't know if a lot of you are aware of how the new POPI standards have been released, and a lot of people need to actually enforce that by June in South Africa in specific. So that just means that there's a lot more effort that's being put into people collecting their data and keeping it in a private manner and preventing other people from accessing these data points. So having said that, that just means that there's actually more effort being put into people actually collecting data for themselves and keeping it to themselves, which means we actually do need to start now leveraging off techniques such as federated learning. And something now that has become more and more prevalent is within the federated learning space. It was relatively new, I think maybe 2018. There were still a lot of little kinks that we need to figure out, and there's still quite a lot of things that need to be trialed and errored. But right now, what we're finding is we're actually getting quite flexible in terms of how we can start training models. So we're actually getting to the level of detail where you could have multiple agents and pick specific parameters and specific features that you want to train a final model on, which becomes quite useful because then you can start sifting out the unnecessary data or unnecessary model parameters that would be reflective in the environment, and you can only bring in the ones that are necessary. So I think having given that context of privacy, as well as now that federated learning is becoming more and more mature to start taking on these things, I think the timing is starting to align quite nicely for me. And as Conrad was speaking, actually, with regards to transfer learning, that's like a huge thing in my space as well. There's a lot of effort and work being put into that. And something that actually I wish I'd known like a year ago was actually how to utilize that methodology, the whole transfer learning concept. We actually tried to deploy something similar like that in a mining industry, and we did not know how to do that. So there's a lot of industry level things that actually require the academic side of things to come to the forum as well. So I'm starting to see more and more of a collaboration between the academic side of things and the practical sense of things merging together. So I think overall, just to summarize everything for myself, it's seeing the collaboration between the two, the academic sphere as well as the industry level expertise and the need is really quite exciting for me.
Awesome.
I'd also like to reply to Kira in agreement and disagreement at the same time, saying that it always depends what you care about. If you're doing ML and how much you care about the neuroscience, oftentimes you can ignore it. Sometimes it's useful even just as an analogy rather than something that's inherently technical, as has happened historically too. And then reinforcement learning seems to often have examples of like, hey, we want to do this thing. Humans are really good at it. We should look at the brain. And actually, if you look at humans, they're not very good at it. So sometimes it's like false attribution of how good the brain is at doing something, and then we should look at it in order to help ML. And sometimes that's not quite the case, or there's missing a crucial bit of information.
So what you're saying is like feed off the collaboration, because some have strengths, some have weaknesses, and they should feed off each other.
Message of the day, yes.
Fantastic. Just to round back to Archie quickly, I might be the only one with this question, but could you give us a quick primer on federated learning in like 30 seconds or less?
Okay. So if I can put it quite simply, so our traditional machine learning techniques is where we have all our data centralized into one location. So that means getting data sets from all the different disparate data sources, bring it into a central location, train it on that central data store. Now with federated learning, what we're doing is we're reversing the approach where we keep data in disparate data sets. So you have it within, let's say you have a Google Drive folder in your personal account. You have another folder sitting in some other disparate source. And what we're doing is we will be sending machine learning models to the data set as opposed to transferring the data to a central source. Now, the benefit of that is the data doesn't get manipulated at any point. It gets trained in your local instance, and that the information that has been learned from there is propagated as opposed to the actual data set itself. So yeah, that's a quick primer on what federated learning is.
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful. The next question is about, okay, let me just read the question because I did not have a good intro into this one. Which unrelated field would benefit most from interdisciplinary or collaborative research with your specific field of research? Chris, would you like to, since this is the message of the day, would you like to start us off?
I'm a neurocentrist, which means that I think everything is related to the brain. No matter, pretty much no matter what field you're currently in, you can probably contribute to neuroscience. I've yet to find a persuasive argument where a person's like, this field can't contribute. So I'm waiting to hear that. And so my answer is yes.
Great. Kira's itching to answer. But you care. Kondo, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so at the moment, I actually couldn't come up with an example on the spot, like in terms of what field would benefit the most from like collaboration, what kind of use solutions, what kind of robotics related solutions. Robotics at the moment, for me, feels like it's more like a future endeavor than a current one. There's some people who try to commercialize it and stuff like this, and there's a lot of kinks that are still being worked out. But I'm not sure actually. But I know for a fact that I guess, regardless of who I collaborate with, there's one or two things that I will learn from them. Yeah.
Okay, I think I do have an answer for you actually, which is also a bit of a cop-out. So the one thing is that I think a lot of these things, like tools that can be applied to other fields, yeah, that kind of happens now in science almost across the board, especially when you're looking at kind of any software or ML sort of applications. So that's one thing that just, it's not really an answer. But I think specific to neuroscience and computational neuroscience, and this is starting to some extent, but I think computational psychiatry is something that's definitely becoming quite popular, and is probably where I see quite a lot of utility potentially from sort of theoretical computational neuroscience in sort of understanding what kind of computational and cognitive defects or how those arise. And by psychiatry, I mean quite broadly, because I have opinions on how various parts of medicine are compartmentalized, but what I really mean is diseases that result in some kind of cognitive or computational output problem. So this would also extend to things like learning difficulties, autism, as well as to the more traditional psychiatry or psychiatric diagnoses like schizophrenia or psychotic disorders and dementias. So yeah, I think broadly that kind of approach hasn't been used as much and could be quite cool. And I guess that also, and some of this has also been done, so it's not my answer at all, but some of the sort of genetic attempts to understand those diseases could also be useful, kind of getting overall genetic exome understandings of what might underlie those sort of diseases. So yeah, that's not quite my answer, but something that I think is really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if you've watched Daphne Coller's talk on this topic. I've just watched it this week, so it's at the forefront of my mind on genetics and how they underlie disease. Archie, will you finish it up?
Sure. So it's a difficult question because I think that what I'm working on is relevant in all industries. Wherever machine learning is relevant, I think it's actually relevant. But something I just like to tell you guys about, and it's actually one of the demos that had happened in one of my lab sessions last week, and it was actually, there was a demo put together just to understand how children behavior can be modified for dyslexic students, and essentially what was utilized was just looking at eye movements to understand how attention is shifted based on specific inputs into the environment. And they're actually, the research itself was actually around enabling dyslexic students to become better in
being able to get the information and process it at a better rate. And this was all like, it had nothing to do with, there was no neuroscience component, or I guess the after effect is neuroscience component, but the demo itself was purely computer vision related. So I think there's definitely opportunity, whether it be in the neuroscience, whether it be in the neuroscience space, whether it be in pure machine learning space. I think there is definitely collaboration. We just need to be more open-minded to these sort of collaborations and working together, because there's definitely some overlaps that we may not necessarily see off the bat. But yeah, I think if we're just more open-minded, we might actually just see them more clearly.
I finally have a non-terrible answer as well, and that would be politicians or policymakers, which technically wouldn't be a field, but would probably would be able, yeah, AI neuroscience would be able to contribute way more than it currently does to policies.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess also just not being afraid to speak up about your ideas, because like Archie said, it's like you never know who's going to be listening. So yeah, don't be afraid. Okay, so we have one more question, which is our final round of good old-fashioned speculation. And since we have such a diverse panels, medicine, neuroscience, I am going to be asking about the future of singularity. So I'm not going to elect someone just jump in. What are your thoughts on the future of AI, with specific regards to singularity, and do we have any real reason to be concerned?
I want to jump in quickly. So I don't believe in there being a singularity or something like this. The reason why is that I think we're struggling with a very basic problem, right? Like in AI, and that's generalization, right? So you hear people talking about AGI and things like this, and you know how what the best way to get there is and stuff like this. And I think until we crack that, we have no business worrying about a singularity, you know, because like if AI stays, I guess to say the way that it is now, in my opinion, where it kind of like can't, or I don't say like it's kind of built to be specific for certain tasks and stuff like this, then it'll be only disruptive for those particular tasks. The one kind of like negative side, I think, or things that we have to look out for, is how it's built and then what it's how certain algorithms or like certain models are built and what they're built for, and the care that needs to be taken when we're basically constructing these models, right? So things like understanding that there's kind of like inherent human bias, like when you're selecting a data set, you know, like in kind of like unfairness and things like this. Like, so as long as we keep an eye on that, I think we should be fine. But I don't think we have any business worrying about any kind of singularity at all. Yeah, and that's my opinion.
I can go next. So I do agree with that. I think we're very far away from a singularity. I've seen some terrible models out in production that, yeah, so I think we're very far away from that. But something I do have to mention is that, you know, just because we're far away from that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be front of mind. A lot of the times when people ask me about this AI ethics, why is that such a big deal? Why do we need to worry about explainable AI? Like, why is all of that such a huge concern? Is, you know, this is actually where it starts. If we don't start off with the best foundations, we might actually end up in the worst case scenario. So I think there are a lot of people out there, I am aware of, that actually do take this quite seriously and who are actually enforcing ethical AI as well. So I think we're safe. I'm hoping we're safe. There are a lot of these ethical committees and everything that are in place for us to ensure that we don't actually go out of line. Also, having said that, the onus is on us at the end of the day, us practitioners. Whoever is building these models, we do need to cater for ethics as well. We need to cater for ethics. We need to ensure that when we are building a model, we understand what it's being built for. We understand whether it is actually explainable. We understand whether this model is actually for the use case that you're trying to do, which is, I think, from what I understand, production design to be, it is part of the process, right? Understanding the core concepts of what you're building for and where the risks are. So if we carry on with the way we're actually doing things and we follow the best practice approaches in software engineering and just building good products overall, I think we're good. We just have to always be aware that, ethics is very, very important and it should be front of mind.
Cool. Great answer so far. And let me do is probably a slightly worse answer. But so first, my understanding of singularity is like the point at which there's AI that is smarter than humans. And sometimes I worry about it. And then I jump on a video call and my fears are pushed aside when I struggle to connect, or there's some sort of connection issue, someone gets dropped. That is, as long as we get the AI overlords to communicate only via video chats, they will never be able to communicate effectively. I think that's one solution. I will say that if you are worried, many people are worried about singularity at some points. But I also think a lot of that fear might be, I don't know, just a little bit of a projection of a human insecurity. I don't know, we are incredibly smart as a species, but we also tend to find new tools for suffering. And so how we use AI, I think, is more important than how good it is at a task, which exactly speaks to what Archie was saying about like privacy, making sure we do it for the right reasons and for the right applications rather than just doing the best at something. So yeah, I would say be thoughtful about your current approach and the impact that it will have. And look within to gauge which concerns we have are realistic or which concerns are like a human-centric fear that something's going to be better than us.
Just to chip in for the last bit. Basically, I have varying opinions depending on the day. I agree that it's not something that's likely to happen soon. I'm also not convinced that generalization is necessary. I could imagine hierarchical models that interact with each other or something. Anyway, I think as humans, we probably have bigger concerns, like things like global warming might be more important. And perhaps at some point because I think ethical AI is obviously the way to go, but obviously there may be limitations in what we can predict, which so far to some extent has been the case. Like you can't always tell what you're going to get wrong, but it's important to try and do that. But I think it's something to bear in mind. You probably have some risk, and I would probably argue that it's okay to take that risk so that you can solve particular problems. And at the moment, I do think it's a particular problem. It's obviously not generalized, but yeah. So I would be more worried about global warming. Maybe AI can help us to think about ways to prevent that. Then yeah. So I guess that last point is just to say, I mean, it's not clear to me that a singularity would necessarily be bad for humans. I don't think I have any intuition of which way it would actually go if it were a thing, even if it's super far away. And so that makes it kind of also difficult to, I think it becomes like something that's quite difficult to actually predict. But yeah, I think at the moment, far enough away. So the general approach of ethical AI, as far as possible, recognizing humans are also very fallible, is where we go. Yeah.
So I'm gonna jump in once again and kind of fight everyone on the singularity point. So I think we at this stage need to worry about AI being exploited. So people using AI tools to do some something that's really not going to be for the benefit of everyone. But with regards to there being a singularity, I still disagree, right? Like, if it happens in the next 10 years, I really don't think so. And why? Perhaps.
I wouldn't say, I would definitely not say that it's soon or anything. I like to think about sci-fi-esque concepts as possibilities.
Yeah. So definitely, right? So I need to kind of assume that there has to be some kind of theoretical limit of whatever hardware that we can create can support, that's one. Number two, I think working in robotics has really made me appreciate how difficult these challenges are, right? So if you're working in machine learning, you're generally trying to work on an agent that only has one job, which is essentially make sense of the inputs, I guess, and maybe output something, make sense of whatever's being fed in, right? And basically understand. It's basically you're understanding the environment, and that's all you're doing. I think in robotics, you have to do that, and then additionally affect the environment yourself, right? So you're now working with a kind of environment that you can also change, right? And I think just seeing how difficult it is for us to get like a robot to pick a cup up and put it down is, that one problem there. I don't think we ever have to worry about there being some kind of singularity or anything. At the end of the day, I still see AI as a tool, and there being some kind of like consciousness or like some stuff where AI is kind of, it's sci-fi, and I think it will stay that way. Yeah.
Motor control is hard. Yeah.
Very hard, very hard. Yeah, I respect it. Yeah.
Fantastic. We're going to round up the panel. Would any of you have any last words of wisdom or closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
So if I guess people are thinking of pursuing a career in AI, or like kind of coming into the academic side, or if you're at the stage where you want to kind of do a master's or a PhD and stuff like this, I would say some of the tips that maybe I can give you that have helped me is that, try and find something that you're also passionate about. And then, the other task is trying to find a good supervisor, someone who actually will give you the freedom to think and kind of explore different options. And then also there is a lot of resources available. I think I'm just speaking for being someone who's coming from South Africa. There's a lot of people, and there's kind of a community in machine learning that you can make use of. And I think Siobhan has been posting a bunch of links in the chat. So I would highly recommend that people go in and check them out. Yeah.
Thanks.
I will add to what Kwanda was saying. My message would be like connections, collaboration, and community. That will get you far. Choose a person who will run with you, rather than a project that seems interesting right now, but you could have all the passion sucked out of it if you don't have the right support.
This has been fun. All I really wanted to add to that is, people are usually friendlier than you think, but sometimes they're busy. So if they don't reply to you, don't take it personally.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying, and especially community and collaboration. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. We're actually all human beings at the end of the day. We're pretty much breathing the same air. So do feel free to reach out to people. They may not necessarily be as welcoming as you hope them to be, but you won't know until you try, and then just keep trying until you actually get there. Don't give up on it just because of one person not responding to you, whatever the case may be. But try and be as open to collaborating as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and your insight this evening. It has been a lot of fun. I've certainly learned a lot, and had a lot of fun. Huge shout out to Julianne, who has been gluing this event together, and it's been absolutely seamless. So thank you for that. And thank you to our audience for joining us tonight. It's been great having the interactions in the chat, and we'd love to have you join us again. We'll be back live in 2 weeks with another talk about single neuronal dynamics and how that influences behavior with Piers Zoldenris from Netherlands. So we'd love to have you back, and have an awesome week. And don't be shy, reach out to people and have fun. Bye, everyone.
Cool. Cheers.
Everyone.